I'm a police officer, but this story happened while I was off duty. I've been in law enforcement for about 8 years now, working at a smaller precinct in a suburban area. Being a cop has taught me a lot about dealing with difficult people, but sometimes it's more entertaining to just sit back and watch other officers handle the situation, especially when you're not the one who has to file the paperwork. That one day had been pretty hectic. I had just finished a 12-hour night shift and managed to get maybe 4 hours of sleep before my dog started whining. She's a German Shepherd I rescued 3 years ago, and she's usually good about letting me rest, but that day she was restless. I realized I had forgotten to stock up on her food, and she was giving me those sad puppy eyes that made me feel guilty. I checked the time and realized I had about 1 hour before I needed to head back for my next shift. Just enough time to run to Walmart, grab some dog food, and get back home to feed her. Simple enough, right? Well, the universe had other plans. I pulled into the Walmart parking lot and found a spot in one of the one-way lanes. You know the type, clearly marked with arrows pointing in one direction, impossible to miss unless you're deliberately ignoring them. I rushed inside, grabbed the dog food and a few other essentials I remembered I needed, then headed back out. That's when I saw it, the most ridiculous standoff I'd ever witnessed in a parking lot, and trust me, I've seen some strange things in my line of work. There was this massive Ford F-350 pickup truck driven by this shorter guy who I'll call Chad, because, well, he was definitely a Chad, facing off against a shiny new Mercedes driven by the most stereotypical Karen I'd ever seen. Karen had decided that the clearly marked one-way signs didn't apply to her, and had driven straight up the wrong way. Now she was in a staring contest with Chad, who had the right of way. Neither of them was willing to back down, and they were completely blocking me in. I could have intervened, shown my badge, and handled it myself. But honestly, I was off duty, tired, and this was too entertaining to interrupt. So I settled in to watch the show. Karen rolled down her window and started demanding that Chad back up his truck. Chad pointed out the obvious, that this was clearly a one-way lane. Karen then declared that she'd been shopping here for 20 years and always went this way. Chad sarcastically replied that she'd been wrong for all those 20 years then. Karen tried pulling the "do you know who I am" card, bragging about her husband being friends with the store manager. Chad mockingly asked if her husband also knew how to read arrow signs. At this point, people were starting to gather around watching the spectacle. Some had their phones out, probably hoping this would end up on social media. That's when a patrol car pulled up. Perfect timing, really. The officer who stepped out was someone I knew from joint operations between our departments. The officer spotted me and came over to ask what was happening. I explained how Karen had ignored the one-way signs and gotten into a standoff with Chad when he wouldn't yield to her. I suggested she might have missed her medication or had too many mimosas at brunch, possibly both. The officer nodded and approached the two vehicles. He motioned for both drivers to step out and meet between their cars. He then gave them an ultimatum. Either they both get back in their vehicles and leave, or they'd both go to jail for disorderly conduct. Karen tried to protest and blame Chad, but the officer cut her off. When Chad attempted to argue that she started it, the officer shut him down too. He warned them that one more word from either of them would result in them spending the afternoon in a cell together. Karen looked like she'd just bitten into a lemon, and Chad's face went through about 5 different shades of red. They both stormed back to their vehicles, but Karen couldn't resist trying to have the last word. She rolled down her window and started to complain again, but quickly stopped when the officer reached for his handcuffs and asked if she'd like to finish her sentence. I've never seen someone roll up a window so fast in my life. She reversed out of there like her car was on fire, almost hitting a shopping cart in the process. Chad followed suit, though he at least had the sense to check his mirrors first. The officer walked back to me and we both burst out laughing. He commented on how some people just can't help themselves, and I pointed out the irony that if Karen had just gone around the block like a normal person, she would have been out of here 10 minutes ago. I finally managed to get out of my parking spot and made it home just in time to feed my very patient dog. When I told my co-workers about it during my shift that night, they couldn't stop laughing. We get our fair share of entitled people on the job. but something about watching it unfold as a civilian just hits different. Backstory: I was diagnosed with muscular dystrophy when I was 6 years old. For those who don't know, it's a progressive condition that gets worse as time passes. I'm 33 now and wheelchair bound, but I've made my peace with it long ago. Instead of dwelling on what I can't do, I focus on the blessings I have, especially my incredible family. My younger sister has been my rock through everything. When I was first diagnosed, my mother explained the situation to her and asked her to look out for me, even though she was the younger sibling. She took that responsibility to heart, and we've had an amazing relationship ever since. And now on to what happened. About 7 months ago, my sister came by to invite me to dinner at a fancy restaurant with her husband and their young son. I tried telling them to go enjoy themselves as a family, but she insisted, saying that her husband and their boy would love to have me there. I couldn't say no to that, so I agreed. A couple days later, they picked me up and we headed to the restaurant. The place was beautiful, clean, well organized, and gave off a warm feeling. But there was one thing that didn't fit the elegant atmosphere: an incredibly loud, obnoxious woman at the table behind us. She was practically shouting and using horrible language, despite children being present. We tried to ignore her and ordered our food. About 30 minutes later, as we were starting to eat, we heard a loud thud, followed by an ear-piercing shriek from the same woman. I struggled to turn around, but when I did, I saw her on the floor clutching her leg. She had apparently hit it against a table while heading to the restroom. While I didn't exactly feel sorry for her after how she'd been acting, I didn't think she deserved to be hurt. But what happened next changed my mind completely. As her friends and restaurant staff tried helping her up, she made a big show about not being able to stand. People started suggesting calling an ambulance, but then she looked around the restaurant and spotted me. She immediately started yelling at me, demanding that I give her my wheelchair since it had wheels and she could use it to move around. I was shocked, but before I could respond, she repeated her demand, this time adding some nasty comments about my disability. That's when my sister intervened. She furiously told the woman off, saying she must be crazy and that she wouldn't get the wheelchair no matter what was wrong with her leg, especially not with such an entitled attitude. Karen immediately jumped to her feet, yes, her supposedly injured feet, and charged at us. She tried grabbing my sister's hair but couldn't reach her, so instead she turned to me, grabbed my blouse, and yanked me out of my wheelchair. While I was on the floor in shock, she started dragging my wheelchair away, all while screaming insults at us and my brother-in-law. But what she didn't know was that my sister had taken self-defense classes in high school specifically to protect me from bullies. In a flash, my sister was in front of her. Karen tried to punch her, but my sister dodged it, pulled out her stun gun, and took her down. The whole thing happened in seconds. Everyone started separating us until the police and paramedics arrived. The officers initially tried to detain my sister, but her husband, who's a lawyer, convinced them to check the security footage first. Meanwhile, they helped me back into my wheelchair and moved us to a quiet corner. After reviewing the footage, the police didn't even have to ask if we wanted to press charges. It was obvious we would. Karen was taken away in an ambulance, and the officers said they'd contact us for further investigation. I hugged my sister afterward, trying to calm her down as the adrenaline wore off. She was shaking but still checking if I was okay. Karen was charged and sentenced to 5 years in prison. She also had to pay a hefty fine for destruction of property since she damaged my wheelchair while dragging it away. After everything was settled, we heard she lost her job and her husband filed for divorce, apparently tired of her entitled behavior causing problems. We didn't pursue a civil lawsuit. We just wanted to put it all behind us. Though I have to admit, when I'm having a rough day, remembering how my sister took down that entitled woman brings a smile to my face. I work at a tech company that specializes in electric vehicles, and my job involves testing prototype cars before they go into production. It's a pretty sweet gig. I get to drive amazing cars and get paid for it. The downside? Our monthly team dinners. Don't get me wrong, free food is great, but spending time with co-workers outside work hours isn't really my thing. Still, my boss insists on these bonding experiences, and since he foots the bill at fancy restaurants, I show up. Last night's dinner was going like usual until one of my coworkers found herself stranded. Her friend had some family emergency and had to leave early, leaving her several drinks in with no ride home. Since I hadn't been drinking and my company car is electric, meaning cheap to run, I offered to give her a ride home. She responded with excessive gratitude, calling me a lifesaver and thanking me profusely. Now, I should mention that this coworker is what you'd call a nervous talker. And when I say nervous talker, I mean she could probably talk underwater with a mouthful of marbles. The first 10 minutes of the drive were fine. I just focused on following the GPS while she chatted about everything under the sun. That's when things got interesting. A BMW started circling around my car on the highway. At first, I thought they just wanted to check out the prototype vehicle I was driving. It happens sometimes, but this guy had other plans. He kept cutting in front of me, brake checking, then dropping back to tailgate me. My coworker didn't even notice at first, still chattering away about her boyfriend's new hobby or something. I tried getting a word in, but she just kept going. Finally, I had to use my serious business voice and told her to buckle up and be quiet because I needed to concentrate. She did buckle up, but completely missed the part about being quiet. Instead, she started rapid-firing questions, asking what was wrong, if we were in danger because of the BMW, and whether she should call her boyfriend or the police. Her panic was rising with each question. Finally, I had to tell her to shut up. I hit the dashcam save button to record the last 10 minutes, just in case. When I saw a clear stretch of road ahead, I floored it. One of the perks of driving a high-end electric car, the acceleration is insane. The BMW tried to keep up, but we left him in the dust. I took the first exit I could once his headlights disappeared from my mirrors. I pulled over to catch my breath and explained things to my coworker, who was now crying. I apologized for yelling and explained that the situation had become dangerous and I needed to focus on getting us away safely. Through her tears, she told me she thought we were going to die. The rest of the drive to her place was awkward silence mixed with sniffling. When I finally got home, there was a police car waiting in my driveway. Turns out my coworker's boyfriend had called them, convinced I was some drunk maniac endangering his girlfriend. I had to do a sobriety test right there in my driveway. Thankfully, I had the dashcam footage to show the officer exactly what happened with the BMW. The officer watched it, nodded, and seemed impressed with how I handled it. He advised me not to make a habit of it, but acknowledged I'd made the right call getting out of there. The next morning, I woke up to an email from our office manager announcing that, due to recent events, the boss would now be reimbursing all employees for ride-share services from company events, requesting that everyone save their receipts. Then came a personal text from her asking why these things always happen to me. For context, I have a history of accidentally getting into bizarre situations at work. Last month, I called a coworker butthead as a joke after helping them with a project. The office manager had to call me in because someone complained. She just told me to act like I've been yelled at and to learn to read my audience better. At least this time, my trouble led to a new company policy that'll keep everyone safer. Though I have to admit, I'm not looking forward to next month's dinner. Maybe I'll just expense that rideshare service myself. I've been a supervisor at my company for over 20 years now, and I've seen my fair share of workplace drama, but nothing quite compares to what happened with my coworker back in 2002. He was one of my direct reports, a brilliant guy when it came to handling our most complex cases, but he had one major problem in his life: his wife. We all knew about her long before the incident I'm about to tell you. She'd show up at office parties and make everyone uncomfortable with her demands and criticism. She'd call multiple times during the workday, and we could always tell it was her because my coworker's face would just fall. The light would literally go out of his eyes when he'd see her number on the caller ID. Then came the heart attack. It wasn't a major one, thankfully, but it was enough to put him in the hospital for a few days. While he was out, everyone in the office whispered about how his wife's constant harassment probably contributed to it. We were joking, sort of, except we weren't really joking at all. When he came back to work, something was different. He had this little device clipped to his belt, a pedometer. Now, this was way before all the fancy fitness trackers we have today. At first, I thought it was part of his recovery plan, and I noticed he was getting up more often, walking around the office whenever he could. But something wasn't right. His work was suffering, and he looked more stressed than ever. I did what any reasonable supervisor would do. I redistributed some of his workload, leaving him with just the complex cases he excelled at. I figured he needed time to recover properly. That's when I overheard it. I was walking to my car one evening when I heard his wife's shrill voice in the parking lot. She was berating him about only reaching 4,000 steps, saying it wasn't even half of what he was supposed to be doing. When he tried to explain what the doctor had said, she cut him off. She threatened him if the pedometer didn't read at least 10,000 steps at the end of every workday. The next day, I called him into my office. I asked if everything was okay, mentioning that I had overheard yesterday's conversation. He explained that his wife, not his doctor, had bought the pedometer and was insisting he walk 10,000 steps every day. When I asked what his doctor had actually recommended, he told me it was just 1.5 miles a day, not all at once. He added that his wife wouldn't listen and accused him of being lazy. This man had just had a heart attack, was still recovering, and his wife was demanding he walk over 6 miles during his workday. But then again, knowing her, I absolutely could. A week later, I heard another parking lot confrontation. His wife was yelling at him about only reaching 5,000 steps, sarcastically asking if he was even trying and if he wanted to end up back in the hospital. That's when I knew we had to do something. The next morning, I gathered our team and told them we needed to help him out, explaining my plan. We started small. Whenever anyone had to walk to the copy room, they'd grab his pedometer. Trips to the break room, pedometer. Walking to the other building for meetings, pedometer. We even had a schedule worked out so it wouldn't look suspicious. We gradually increased the daily step count over 2 weeks until we hit the magic 10,000. Of course, we had to be careful. If the step count jumped too suddenly, she'd get suspicious. So we planned it out. 5,000 the first week, 7,000 the next, and finally, the full 10,000. He still got chewed out a couple times during the transition, but we knew it was temporary. The best part was watching his stress levels drop. Every day when his wife would check the pedometer, she'd finally see those 10,000 steps. She had no idea that those steps were actually a combined effort of our entire department. Some days my co-worker only did about 3,000 steps himself, exactly what his doctor had recommended, while the rest of us made up the difference. One day he pulled me aside with tears in his eyes. He expressed his deep gratitude, saying we had no idea what a difference this had made at home. I told him not to mention it, and really meant it, adding that none of us wanted to deal with his wife if she found out. That made him laugh, the first real laugh I'd heard from him in years. We kept up the pedometer relay for months until his doctor finally cleared him for more activity. By then, his wife had moved on to criticizing other aspects of his life, but at least we'd won this small battle. I wonder if we should have done something more, reported her behavior to someone maybe. But workplace dynamics are complicated, and domestic situations even more so. All I know is that for those few months, we gave him some peace. And sometimes that's the best you can do for someone. The pedometer conspiracy, as we called it, became one of those office legends that new employees would hear about during their first few weeks. Of course, we never told the story while his wife was still alive. We weren't stupid. But now, years later, I can finally share how an entire department came together to outsmart one of the most entitled people I've ever met.